Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Creating Informed Learners in the Classroom, Librarian Experiences of Developing a Multi-Institutional Information Literacy Project webinar, presented by Clarence Maybee, Rachel Fondator, and Amity Saha from Purdue University. My name is George Bergstrom, and I am the Southwest Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be the host and question moderator today. I'd like to start off the webinar with a few quick announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. The session today is 1 hour, so you will get 1 LEU. If you are watching the archived recording of this webinar, the instructions on how to obtain your LEU are available in the video's description on YouTube. Or you can also find those instructions on the ISL's continuing education site under the LEU policies. I'd also like to announce that today is sort of the first in what we hope will be a recurring webinar series from academic librarians informing us of their research. And so with that announcement, I would now like to turn the presentation over to Clarence, Rachel, and Amity.
Thanks, George. First off, I want to start by thanking George and Lisa and the State Library for hosting our presentation. We very much appreciate the creation of this venue as a way to sort of communicate about projects that we're doing, and hopefully hear from other people about the projects they're doing around the state and so forth. So thank you. So we were going to start by just sort of going round robin and maybe saying a little bit about ourselves. I am Clarence Maybee, and I am the W. Wayne Booker Chair in Information Literacy at Purdue University. And I have the distinction amongst my colleagues today of being the only one who's still on campus. So I'm in West Lafayette, Indiana, while they are in other places, but I'll let them tell you about that. So Rachel?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Fondator. I am the Information Literacy Instructional Designer at Purdue. I am not on Purdue's campus right now. I am tuning in from Illinois. And I'm really excited to tell you about the project today. Amity?
Hi, everyone. I'm Amity Saha. I'm the student graduate staff in the CILC project, and also student in hospitality and tourism management at Purdue University. And I'm also off campus, currently living in Greenbelt, Maryland.
Okay, thank you both. So I'm going to go ahead and share the slides. Let's see. There we go. Does everyone see the slides?
Yep, I can see the slides, Clarence.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So, so the three of us, along with some other folks that you'll hear about in the presentation, have been working on a project for the last 2.5 years. It's actually, our project was funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services, so an ILMS grant. We've been very excited about it because it's sort of a collaboration between three universities to embed information literacy into curriculum. So let me tell you how we're going to go about our talk. So first I'm going to give you a real snapshot overview of the project in general, just so you kind of have a sense of where we're heading. And then I'm going to talk about an instructional design model that is the instructional design model that kind of underpinned our project. And then I'll turn it over to Rachel, who will talk much more about the details of the project and kind of how we developed it, and then also kind of how it took place. And then we'll turn it over to Amity, who will talk a little bit about some of the, so we're doing it also, of course, as a research project, as well as just a project. And so we're kind of in the initial stages of looking at some of the data that we collected to, see, think about, what we've done, and then also, what we might do if we were to do it again. So Amity's going to talk a little bit about those outcomes. So the project, this is the nutshell version, and then Rachel will give you a lot more detail when we get to it. But it was a collaboration between the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Purdue, and then the University of Arizona. And what we did was we created a program, and in the program, we had librarians and classroom instructors working as partners. So the two of them to develop information literacy assignments that would be integrated into the the instructor's course, right? So it was like a 4-week, our workshop series took place, like we met once a week over 4 weeks, and we worked through that informed learning design model together. And then the instructors, and sometimes with the librarians working with them and sometimes on their own, but then they would implement it in their course in spring 2020 and fall 2021. We changed our plans due to the pandemic. So Rachel will talk a little bit about that. But so this last semester, we've been kind of looking at we had the instructors create reports and the librarians create reflections. And so we've been looking at that to sort of, see what we thought was successful and ways we might change the program. And it was about, I should say, it was 5 teams at each university. So it was a total of 30 people involved in it, 5 teams at each. Okay, so informed learning design. See that I'm taking a quick look at the chat and I see that there was okay. Yeah, we're gonna hold questions until the end. So informed learning design is a design model that actually I developed when I was working on my dissertation. And I'll talk a little bit about how that came to be and also why we used it in this project in particular. There we go. So the design model is based on an approach to information literacy called informed learning, which was developed by Christine Bruce. She's actually on the left side of the slides. She actually came to Purdue many years ago, I think in 2013, did a workshop with us. So I had this picture of her. But informed learning her model is, suggests that, often when we're using information, she would probably say always or almost always, it's because we're trying to learn something, right? We're trying to, learn something about history or chemistry or whatever. And so she's saying in information literacy work, we should really zero in on, how do people, students use information while they're doing those things, right? While they're really sort of engaged in classroom learning. And so the informed learning model sort of sets that up for thinking about, how can we teach students to use information better while they're learning in the classroom? And in my, so she was my doctoral advisor, full disclosure. And so when I decided to explore or examine informed learning taking place in a classroom, so I looked at I interviewed teachers and students and observed what happened in the classroom in a language and gender course. And out of that, I sort of saw, how the teacher approached it, and that informed a design model. So, many of us use, different instructional design models. A lot of people use backwards design. I've used that a long time for myself. And informed learning design is similar to that, right? And that it starts by asking us to think about, what are our goals for learning? What are our expectations? That we want the students to know at the end of, the instruction? And then what are the activities that are going to help the students get there? And then how will we know they've gotten there, right? So what kind of assessment activities will we incorporate? But informed learning design, sort of based on, the informed learning approach, really focuses on sort of what are the goals for how the students will learn about using information, and then also what are the disciplinary or course kind of content goals that we have for them. And that would be like the facts or theories or the practices about history or chemistry or English or whatever it is that the students are studying. So we kind of want to focus on both of those things, how the students use information, but then also what are they learning as a result of using that information. Which of course makes it a very good model for the kind of project that we were doing, where we were really having librarians partner with instructors to integrate information literacy into the disciplinary classroom. So, excuse me, the stage one, right, is to focus on the goals for instruction. And as I said before, the key thing is that we want to look at goals for how we want students to learn about using information in new ways. And then also, of course, what are they expected to learn about, the course content or, practices or theories, et cetera, in that course. And one other thing about the informed learning and informed learning design is that it really asks the teachers at this point. So of course, there's many things, right, that students learn when they're in our classrooms. And so the teacher in this case should really think about what is the most important or significant things that students need to learn about using information and about, what they're supposed to learn about the subject, right, about history or physics or whatever, and then really focus on them through their instruction. So that's what we asked the participants in the workshops to do, was to sort of single out, like, what do you want your students to know or do? And then how do you want them to use information to know that? And do they already know how to do those things, or is that something that we need to teach them? And so what are the goals for those things? And so, of course, activities. Let's see. So actually, I was going to give an example about one project that we worked with, not for this, but before, that kind of I think gives a good example. Rachel and I worked with some pharmacists at Purdue, and they were, excuse me, creating a new course. And the new course was to get students ready for their residencies, where they were going to go out into hospitals and, work with pharmacists, making drug recommendations, right, for patients as they went through, their hospital rounds. And so the goals, or what they were hoping that the students would be able to do, was, of course, to be able to make drug recommendations very quickly. And they knew from experience that the students tended not to be able to make them very quickly. They were able to make those recommendations, but it would take them, far longer than they would have in a hospital setting, right? It might take them an hour to sort of look at various information and synthesize it and come up with their recommendation. And of course, that doesn't work. So what they needed the students to be able to do was to make those recommendations in between 10 and 20 minutes. And they would say 20 minutes is far too long, right? And so their goal, sort of from a disciplinary standpoint, was that they wanted the students to be able to, engage in this practice of making recommendations. But what they realized from working with students for a few years was that the information sources that the students needed to engage with were the patient's chart, and then also standards that they might draw some information from to make the recommendation. And what they realized was that the students often read the entire chart sort of front to back before they thought about what the recommendation would be. And that took them a long time. And then they had a lot of information that was kind of extraneous. And so the information part of it that they really wanted to focus on was getting students to recognize what was the most important information to pull out of the patient's chart as they made that recommendation. So that was sort of the goal. The information goal, right, was to have the students think about what information they needed. And then the content focus goal was really to, create a practice, improve their practice around making these recommendations. So what they did for the learning activities, and this, was again what we asked the instructors and the librarians in our program, was to sit and think through, like, now that you have your goals, what would you have the students do to help them achieve those goals? And again, they had to focus on sort of how did they want the students to use information, and then also, how did they want them to engage with the course content. So in that pharmacy example, they used case studies, and they had the students kind of go through case studies repeatedly, and of course, telling them, your goal is to really think about what information you need to look at on the patient's chart, and what information you need from standards, and how can you quickly, pull those things together. And so then they just had them practice, and they would, work in groups, and a student would be assigned that day to go through, they were the one who was going to make the recommendation. So they would look at the information and then proceed to, come up with a recommendation and kind of workshop it with the other students. And so we interviewed some of the students afterwards for a project, and I must say they did not enjoy that, the experience of doing those case studies, because I think it really put them on the spot to, sort of in front of their peers, show all of their, their knowledge. But as the instructors would say, but they're actually, doing exactly what they are going to have to do in practice. And it's better that they do it here in a safe environment than they do it in the hospital when there's some, some doctors, nurses, and some other pharmacists around, sort of, watching them sort of figure out how to make these, drug recommendations more quickly. So how would they, and then the last part, of course, is assessing that. And the question is, how would they assess it, right? And so again, in informed learning design, the assessment is focused on, what did the students learn about using information literacy, right? And then what did they learn about, the course content. And so in that case, they used reflections. That's something that we encouraged the participants in our project to do, to really get at whether the students were changing the ways in which they, were using information, what they were pulling from the patient charts, and what they were pulling from the standards to make those recommendations. So they actually, after each time that they did one of the case studies, then they would complete some reflection questions. So it specifically asked them, like, what was your experience of using information? And then it would drill down and say, what information did you, look at first on the patient's chart, and why did you do it that way, et cetera. So really getting them to reflect on the way in which they were approaching that, but also telling the instructors, where the students were, right? So they did that at the beginning, and then in the middle, and then at the end. And of course, the students were a lot faster and much more equipped towards the end. It did also, show the instructors some of the ways that, some things didn't work that well, and it showed them ways they could improve it for the next time. So those were the 3 activities that we went through in our 4 weeks with the instructors in our program. And they each, created a different project. So we had at the end 15 disciplinary projects that involved information literacy that were embedded into the classrooms. I'm going to now turn it over to Rachel to talk a little bit about the program and how we developed it, and then what we saw as some of the outcomes.
Okay, thanks, Clarence. So now that we kind of have done an overview of the informed learning design model, we wanted to talk a bit about what we did, how we did it, how it went, and of course, given that hindsight is 2020, right? What are some things that we ended up learning through this process of developing a program around this model? Clarence, do you mind moving forward? Forgot I don't have the control. Okay. So as Clarence mentioned, we had partners at 3 different universities. Many of us come from Purdue University, including Michael Flurl, who's on that slide right there. He's now at Ohio State, but at the time that we started this grant was at Purdue. And we had also people from University of Arizona and University of Nebraska. And recognizing that part of the idea behind the grant was for us to bring this informed learning design model that we've used in various ways at Purdue to other institutions. We sought out partners at similar institutions, and luckily we had some connections. Do you mind going to the next slide, Clarence? So one of the things that we all had in common, the librarians who are at UNL and the University of Arizona, is that we all had experience at Purdue. Those were librarians who had previously been at Purdue. George knows them both as well. Is that we all had worked on a faculty development program at Purdue that's called IMPACT is the short version. It's Instruction Matters Purdue Academic Course Transformation. It's a mouthful. We call it IMPACT for short. So when we were thinking about how we would develop this program, we wanted to leverage the things that were notable, the benefits that were notable about IMPACT, and to incorporate those into this particular project. So one of the things that in talking, all of us recognized, yeah, they were all at Purdue at one time, is that we all acknowledged that having this dedicated time and space for improving learning was the single most important and beneficial thing of this faculty development program. So we wanted to incorporate that into this project that we were doing. One of the things, though, that was different was that with IMPACT, this was a more general pedagogical program. So faculty could draw from lots of different theories and different models that they could use to improve student learning in their class. In our case, we all are librarians, and we recognize the benefit of focusing simultaneously on information and disciplinary learning. So we decided to make this specifically an information literacy program. We wanted instructors to have the time and the space to think about, how do my students need to use information in the context of this course, and how can I highlight that a bit more? Again, different from IMPACT, one of the things that we wanted to have the scope, or the scale rather, be a bit more targeted. Instead of having them think generally about their course, we wanted them to focus on designing information-rich student projects or assignments, something that was a little bit smaller in scale, that we could really dig into over the course of the program. And finally, we really wanted this to be an opportunity for librarians and instructors to partner together to create something. So one of the benefits from IMPACT is that people have a chance to exchange and work together. We really wanted this to be an opportunity for librarians to have the ability to share their knowledge and to work with instructors on something that the instructors would then teach in the course. Can you move to the next slide, Clarence? Okay, so in terms of developing the, I'll just call it the CILC, Creating Informed Learners in the Classroom program, we had our mission, right, which was to bring this design model to other institutions. We had our partners who we all had this sort of shared experience while working at different institutions, that we could try this out in different places. And we had funding from IMLS, which was wonderful. But then the next step was, of course, us actually working together, spread out across the country to develop this program. Next slide, please. So we were awarded this grant pre-COVID, so things felt and looked very different. But the original plan was that we would have Clarence and Amity go to each institution. We would have a half-day workshop for librarians that would introduce them to the informed learning design model. Some people were probably familiar with it, but it was also something that we wanted the librarians to feel ownership over and to be able to then integrate into their work with the instructors. About a week and a half later, the plan was for them to travel back to those institutions and to have a one-day, very intensive workshop with the librarian and instructor pairs, where they would go through the design model to design or redesign this very information-rich student project. That was going to happen kind of the first part of the first year, I believe. No, it was the second part of the first year. And then the next 2 years would be about implementation, whether it was the following semester or the one after that. And then the reporting out, as Clarence said, that we gathered a combination of the sort of the worksheets, the documents people were actually going to be engaging with during the workshops. There would be librarian reflections, and most importantly, there were going to be these reports where instructors would summarize the things that they saw students being aware of as it came to both the course learning outcomes or learning goals of the course and the ones specifically about using information. And then finally, in the last year of the grant, there would be this really nice in-person symposium for all of these different teams to get together to show the work that they had done and present on their experiences. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we had the need to pivot, I guess about 4 months before we planned to do the in-person workshops after we had developed the curriculum and everything for it. COVID hit, and there was no way that we could go in person. Next slide. So what we actually ended up doing in talking to one another was we wanted to make this an online program and enable there to be online engagement. So instead of trying to, make as few changes as possible to what we had already developed, we thought about what's going to be most conducive for an online program. So we ended up making what had been a very intensive 1.5-day workshop. We ended up turning into a 4-week online program. There would be both synchronous and asynchronous components. So all of us, all 15 teams across the 3 institutions, plus the design group, the project group, we would meet weekly, as Clarence mentioned. But there would also be sort of a flipped component where people would be engaging with content, going through reflection posts, things like that. And we used Brightspace, the LMS, to host that. And again, there was this larger cohort of all of the teams across all of the institutions that would join for these 75-minute sessions every week. The next 2 years after that followed a similar plan to the original plan of implementation and then reporting out. And the thing that was really important to us in the reporting out was to capture not only what the instructors' intentions were, right, with those learning goals, which Clarence mentioned at the beginning, but also what is it that the students were aware of in terms of using information, and were they the same, were they different, and how might those insights feature in the changes that the instructors would make in the future. So those were all things that we captured or that were captured in the reports. Can you move forward? One more slide, please. I actually wanted to mention really fast that we had one example that was really nice. It was from, I guess we had 15 different disciplines, lots of different courses that were people from all different disciplines, all different courses that were featured in the program. It was really nice because it was people from chemistry to writing. There was a gender and women's studies course. There was a pharmacy class as well. So it was really nice because there was a lot of exchange. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about very briefly was in the reporting out, we got a chance to hear from instructors about, in a lot more detail about their intentions. One was for a health and human sciences course. And the main idea behind the project was that they wanted students to really reconsider, like the information goal, what they wanted students to reconsider was this idea of local sources of authority when it came to public health campaigns. So it was a nice opportunity because it was a very information-rich project to begin with, but through the process of students creating public health campaigns for COVID in a specific locale, students were able to think through and to recognize the value of local sources of information, particularly when it plays out with very real decisions that people make about their health, their behavior when it came to COVID. So that was just one example, and I'm sorry that's not on the slide, of the kinds of projects that that instructors were coming with and some of the decisions that they made in partnership with librarians. Finally, some of the benefits of doing this program online. I think that at first many of us struggled because we already created the program to be in person. And I think that we were really excited about that sort of that dynamic of being in person, but we had to shift to online. Many of us had to deal with the emotional and the logistic challenges. But thinking through it, there were actually a lot of benefits that came with hosting this program, conducting it rather online. And a lot of them have to do with these sort of invaluable resources that we all want more of, but usually we hit limitations, and they come down to, access to people or to dedicated time and space. So the first benefit was just that before we were kind of going to do siloed workshops where the only opportunity for instructors to connect with one another across institutions was at that final in-person symposium, which would happen in year 3. But with the change, we were able to make that happen in year 1, and we had 30 different people engaging across institutions, which was a great opportunity for people to, I think, learn more about their discipline and their own way of teaching, and that students learn in their discipline by talking to people from different disciplines. Secondly, the original plan was that we would introduce librarians to informed learning design and the instructors to informed learning design in a day and a half. And that is a lot to process. So we actually had the opportunity for more time, 4 weeks, for them to really think through informed learning design and incorporate it into their design projects. There is the time, which librarians always want more of, to be in partnership with instructors, and vice versa. A lot of instructors and librarians mentioned that one of the greatest elements of the project was having this space to collaborate with one another. And finally, there was just this dedicated time and space to really think about how students are experiencing and using information in order to learn in the context of their classes. And it's something that people think value, but in the context of our busy days and all the things that have to happen, it's not something that often does happen. So this was a really great benefit that everyone mentioned. So at this point, I am going to pass it over to Amity.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for giving us so much good activities plan and the benefits of online program. So we all now know that creating informed learners in the classroom has 15 different student projects that has been developed by a librarian and instructor team. And although we are currently in a very initial stage, as Dr. Maybee said, that we offer research, however, we are seeing some of the important themes are emerging now. And many students from these 15 projects were much involved with the informed learning activities that has been done in the classes and connected really to their individual assignments, individual and group assignments. The first of all, we are saying like the rubrics are providing the clarity. The rubrics was actually outlined and provided by CILC team, not only useful for the faculties to create the submissions, but also it delivered clear picture to the students on what the expectations were. And students were also seeing that information is diverse. As librarians are spending more times with faculties throughout this CILC project, it is helping making a bond among these in an exciting way. And also that librarian-instructor partnership helped students to learn course materials in a holistic approach. Librarians were actually helping searching the research resources for the students. And these librarians' efforts made students realize that information can be diverse. And besides the classroom materials, there are other sources of information, such as YouTube videos, courtroom recording, historical archives, etc., etc. And they also understood that they have to process those information not only for the classroom, but in future for their careers, including it will help them in searching their jobs. And students, we have seen, like, went above and beyond in many of the cases, like when we supported students learning. These efforts are beneficial in many ways. The 15 student projects actually shown that students were very much interested to take extra steps when to complete the assigned tasks, either that is individually or in a group setting. And also, Dr. Maybee also earlier mentioned about like post-project reflections. That was quite notable because we were able to understand directly students' perspective, and each was mandatory by the CLC guidelines. So from many of their students' responses, we have seen that students are finding these projects to be interesting. And some of the questions in the post-project reflections were asking, like, if you were interviewing questions asked to students were like, if you're interviewing for a job or an internship and the interviewer is going to ask them about this student project, then what do you want to know them? What do you want to let them know about this student project? So we received some of the responses that was like, if we are going to, in a chronological order, they said about the leadership they learned from this student project. And they also learned from teamwork. And interestingly, they learned the credibility of experts. And in another student project reflection, they said, like, students were asked, like, if you have to do this project once again, then what would you are going to do differently? And interestingly, they responded with the themes like, they will invest more time, they will communicate with their group members more elaborately, and also they will learn more vigorously the research techniques. Yes, those are some preliminary findings, and I believe we are going to get a lot more findings from our research project. And yes, with this, I'm going to again hand over this to Dr. Maybee.
Thanks, Amity. So I was just going to sort of conclude the presentation by talking a little bit about some of our lessons learned so far. One thing we learned, right, was that while we intended to do this sort of half-day workshop for librarians, and in the end, we kind of did a very brief introduction of our model to them and then had them work with the instructors, that I mean, it worked, but I think that the librarians would have benefited from more time to sort of, you know, engage with that model and then reflect on it before working with the instructors. I mean, I think the original intent was sort of for the librarians to, you know, be basically, you know, the guides who knew a bit more about the model than the instructors. But as it turned out, they were both kind of learning about it simultaneously. And that, you know, worked out differently. We think it would have perhaps worked a little better if the librarians had been able to do things with the librarians, you know, before and working with the instructors. Let's see. So, you know, some housekeeping stuff, right, were things that we thought we didn't necessarily, we could improve upon, right? So we were using Brightspace, which is our learning management system at Purdue, to put a lot of documents and do a few other things. But then because we wanted a place for the instructors and the faculty to be able to work together. We used Google Docs, and it seemed to be very confusing, sort of moving around between all of those things. And the participants were always losing their link to their Google Doc. And even though we put that in Brightspace so they could always go find it again, it just seemed to be added, there was an extra challenge there. And so things that we would think about next time were, what's a better way that we could do that? And of course, I should say that, we were not, while of course we've all used our LMS at Purdue, we were not used to developing things for online. So it was a learning experience for us. And I think we learned a lot of things, and we made a lot of good things happen. But I would say our last lesson learned was, it was, at the end of the day, I think that people who are really good at designing online learning experiences would have had less trouble. What saved us, because that was our first time really doing it in a large scale way, was that we had all this experience working with, instructor development through our impact program and other programs. So we knew when we recognized, when the instructors and the librarians were getting confused about something, and we knew how to we would come back and, revisit that or connect with them outside of our workshops to keep them on track and things like that. And I think we were able to do that because we have a lot of experience at Purdue in doing those sorts of projects. And we were able to translate that to online. Whereas I think, the online things that we created, I think were good and they worked, but, I think now we have a lot of experience that we would be able to bring to doing that, the next time. So with that sort of concludes the presentation. As Rachel talked about a little bit earlier, we're going to have a symposium. It is going to be July 12th, 13th, and 14th. And it's really, in one sense, a celebration of the work that we've done. So we're going to have the librarians and instructors. There'll be panels where the different librarians and instructors talk about the project and what they learned and what they did with the students and what they learned from that experience of integrating information literacy into their disciplinary courses. We're also going to have some keynote speakers. So Christine Bruce, who's the creator of the informed learning approach to information literacy, will be the keynote. And then Drew Whitworth, who is in the UK, and Lorna Dawes, who's also at Nebraska, will be invited speakers. And they've both done work with informed learning in different contexts. And so they're going to talk about the things that they've done. Lorna actually did a study of classroom instructors and their experiences with information literacy, or informed learning, she would say. So I think that's going to be really interesting. So the symposium is going to be all in the afternoon. And because everyone is, we've all had so much time on Zoom, we decided to have it on something called AirMeet, which is a different sort of platform that kind of tries to replicate an in-person conference experience. So we're hoping that will kind of be engaging and exciting for folks as well, if they're going to spend 3 days together. And it's 3 half days together talking about instruction and information literacy. And with that, I think we're done with the presentation, and we would love to hear any questions or thoughts that folks have. And I guess I can stop the recording so that we can all see each other.
All right. Well, thank you, Clarence, Rachel, and Amity. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. Or if you really want to speak up, this is a small enough group that if you raise your hand or whatever it is in Zoom and let me know, I can unmute you. And while I am waiting for people to do that, I am going to copy the link for the LEU request in case you need an LEU for today's webinar. You can go ahead and fill out the form, and I will get that to you later in the week. And please, as I said, feel free to type your questions out or hit the raise hand, and we will be happy to unmute you. While we're waiting to see if anyone has any questions, I guess the one thing I was curious about is you said at the beginning it was about a 4-week online for the librarians and instructors. Approximately how much time did they spend synchronous versus asynchronous over that time?
So the meetings were all 75 minutes, right, Clarence? Like the time together. Pre-work ranged, introduction to the model was, I think, the most content that they had to engage with before coming. But it was relatively limited. I wouldn't say that it was more than like 2 hours outside of, time together. And, you can really, I'm sure some people spent a lot of time really thinking through what decisions they wanted to make with their projects. But in terms of the content that we created, we designed for them to go through, it was much less than 2 hours, probably about 45 minutes.
We actually had we were trying to do as much work in the sessions as possible. So, because we knew that it could be a barrier to participation if there was a lot of, perceived a lot of work they had to do outside.
Yeah, it's one of those, challenges of, the benefit is the time that the instructors and the librarians had together. But there is that prerequisite of understanding the model. So how do you balance all of those things? So we think we did a decent job. There are some things that we would change, but for the most part, we tried to go more in favor of what Clarence said, time together and time doing the work in our scheduled sessions.
Sounds good.
And we sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
We did notice that there was a slight culture difference between our universities. And so, of course, at Purdue, the libraries has, for the last 10 years has made a major push to one of the things that we do is, basically faculty development. That's one of our approaches to information literacy. Whereas other universities, I think, have put their dime in a different direction. So, and so they maybe they do some professional development, but less of it, right? So I felt like, or it seemed to me that the librarians at Purdue and the instructors at Purdue, many of whom who had gone through our impact program, kind of, knew how to interact with each other in the program. Like, they just sort of got down to it. Whereas in one of the things we heard repeatedly from the librarians at the other universities was, wow, I never get experiences like this where I get to sit down and, work on a assignment with an instructor. So, and that wasn't consistent across the board, but we did hear that from more than one librarian. So, and we talked about that too. It's like, is there something that, if we did this at other universities, would there be something we'd want to do early on about sort of helping set up those relationships? We encourage people to actually, we encourage librarians to look for instructors that they already knew were doing something interesting, and maybe they had worked with them, and to do it with them in the project. And that worked sometimes, and that was, I think, a step up. Other times it was just like, this instructor applied and we need a librarian, so hey, hey Judy, would you mind partnering with this person? And sometimes that worked out really, really well, actually. So.
Great. So any questions from the audience?
Or is anyone doing similar things that they might want to talk about?
Any comments? I mean, we have time. This is where I have to use my teacher hat that one of my colleagues talks about, the uncomfortable silence. Give it time.
One of the strategies I've heard is, what questions do you have? Not, do you have questions?
There you go.
What questions do you have?
Sure. Well, as I'm again giving it time for people to think about that, I will say, as I said at the beginning, that we hope to make this a series. So if there are any librarians out there who have projects they want to get feedback on or discuss, you are more than welcome to reach out to me. And if you need the recording of this, if you want to go back over it again, that will be on the Indiana State Library's Continuing Education website, hopefully within a week or so. Your emails are on file with us. I should be sending that out as soon as it's ready. So while I am happy to stay here and allow more questions to come in, if you have other meetings or other things to get to, I completely understand. And I want to thank Clarence, Rachel, and Amity one more time, and thank all of you for attending. So I will hang out here and field anything else. Oh yes, Lisa, you can stop the recording.